Hi, everybody. Can you guys see us? Say it in the chat. Okay. No audio? You can't hear me? Shoot.
Test. Can you hear me, guys?
They can hear us. It's a delay, so they'll hear us in a few seconds. There's probably like a good 10-second delay. So my problem is that here I am, like, so busy getting everybody checked in and getting their mics checked that I don't have any notes for myself here. So welcome everybody to the Worldwide Issues and Advocacy panel. And we have 5 panelists today. We have Andrea from Mexico, the Elephant Journal System from Australia. We have Dr. Serenity Sosecion from Puerto Rico. We have Power to the Plurals, Sarah and Clark from the Netherlands. We have the, oh goodness, I have to say it right, Sophic Bouquet from Canada. And we are the Chris's from the US, and we're just the panel moderator. We're not going to be talking about the US. When it comes to plural issues and DID issues, we are far overrepresented. So the question is, what are the issues for plurals in other areas of the world? What's the access to medical care or therapy, specialized programs, specialists, and so on like for those who use such services? Or what's the cultural climate when it comes to accepting and rejecting plurality? Or how plurality in general is portrayed in the media in your country? Any positive or negative, possibly, examples of plural acceptance in your area or region? And I'll go through a list of actual questions, just giving an idea of what the whole panel is about. And what frustrations you have about all of the tools and the publications being basically US-centric or at least English-centric literature studies, focus groups, or just the overall focus of the media on plurality in the US, and how your country can improve in terms of plural acceptance and inclusion. And then we'll end with some advice. So I have some questions for the panel. And I'm trying to juggle like so many different interfaces. I'm sorry. Okay, so each panelist, please introduce who you are, what type of plural system y'all are, and where you're from, and maybe your non-US affiliations. Let's start with Andrea.
City actually, and I have an other specified dissociative disorder, which in my case means that my identity is fragmented in different parts, that each one of them has a specific function in the outside world, and they do not have a lot of communication between them. Also, I experience from dissociative amnesia, derealization, and depersonalization disorders. At the moment, I am undergoing psychiatric treatment for major depression, dysthymia, post-traumatic stress disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder. I am working in my stabilization and little by little being able to understand myself and know how to cope with all my different parts and how to function in the world.
Hi, we're Dr. Session. We're from Puerto Rico. We're a plural system and endogenic, but I've experienced trauma, so it's a bit complicated. And I'm trying to remember the other stuff that you asked. Actually, I kind of spaced, but let me think. Well, we work as a psychologist in the U.S. right now, but we did half of our education in Puerto Rico and half here. So not only were we raised there, but we also had some of our training in psychology in both places. Yeah, and that's about it for us.
Hey, the Elephant Journal System. I'm from Australia. I'm a traumatic system. I've got DID diagnosed as well as BPD, PTSD, adjustment disorder, and non-specific anorexia. I don't really have any affiliations with anybody in the US at the moment, apart from my friends that I've just recently made. That's all from me.
Hello, my name is Sarah and Clark. We are 31 years old and we are from the Netherlands, where we live together with our 2 cats and our amazing 10-year-old son. We have a website called powertotheplurals.com, and I'm not sure what affiliations in the USA mean, so I'm not sure how to answer it. So that's all for my introduction. Thank you so much.
I guess it's my turn to talk. We're the Sapphic Bouquet. I'm Hyacinth, and we are a quadgenic collective from Canada. And we used to identify as endogenic, but some of our past trauma has made us kind of question how much of our plurality is caused by trauma or not. And yeah, we don't really have any affiliations or anything medically or yeah.
Hi, I guess my New York accent didn't come out very well. It was supposed to be your non-US affiliations. I probably slurred it or something. Um, so just to fill in, Andrea is from Mexico. The Sapphic Bouquet is from Canada. Dr. Serenity Sosation is from Puerto Rico. Power to the Plurals, Sarah Clark is from the Netherlands. And Elephant Journal System is from Australia. Okay, great. What frustrations do you all have about US-centric or English-centric literature studies focus in the media or focus in the publications or even in the stigma? I mean, it's so insulting, right? But even in the stigma about the disorder, that it tends to be this myth of this being a US-centric issue. So why don't we address that? We will start at the bottom this time. We'll start with Sapphic Bouquet. Thank you.
I think some of the biggest issues surrounding that is that sorry, I'm really anxious right now. I'm kind of, anyway, so some of the biggest issues surrounding that is the fact that the US typically sees scientific things as the 100% most true evidential based arguments. And so the research, it's not based off of anything besides empirical evidence. There's no concept of psychological things as much, like subjective experiences, that kind of thing. I'm rambling. So I feel like the biggest issue is that it doesn't take into account like experiences of, say, possession in different countries, where that may be a religious experience and may not even be studied because it's non-American. So that's, I guess, what I think.
Did I get that? Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Sachin?
I mean, I think one of the biggest frustrations is how little it represents us and our lived experience, because there is this assumption that plural systems are only in the U.S. And I would say that not only that, but that they're straight white women, cis women, and so that also causes a lot of problems where it just feels like it doesn't represent anything that we're going through accurately at all. I think, though, that we're a bit lucky in the sense that when we were younger in Puerto Rico, they actually did have some research. There was one person doing research at the time in the early 2000s. It wasn't great, but compared to nothing, it was actually pretty good because it had some case studies actually from the island and other people that we could sort of relate to. But since then, I don't know that I've seen anything similar to that. And I feel like most of the case studies are just not something that we relate to. And kind of like what the Sapphic Bouquet was just saying, it doesn't take into account other experiences like possession or, I don't know, or shamanism or anything that's different. And so I think that that's part of the frustration that we have with it.
Elephant Journal System?
Yeah, so one of my biggest frustrations is, I suppose, that the Americans, they add Zs to everything, like depersonalization or depersonalization. Like, it just really does my OCD, really. And like, no, but seriously, it's more like it's not an issue here, and it's very underground. There's no funding, there's no services. So it's not as though even that it's acknowledged in the US as well. It's just that it kind of exists somewhere. But in saying that, all the stuff that comes out labels plural people as, once you have that label, you are basically, that's it. You can't function anymore. There's no studies on functional systems that can become childcare workers or lawyers or even psychologists. It's just you're damaged and that's it. There seems to be just that misinformation about plurals. We're not taken seriously. We're completely generalized. And the media just seem to get a kick out of making up stories about how crazy we are. So that's the biggest problem for me, is that apparently we're all just destabilized, and that's all they can focus on in their studies.
What frustrates me about everything that is being managed here in Mexico regarding mental health and specifically DID is that I think that since all the research is coming from the United States, as Dr. Sartesian was saying, it can ignore completely other factors like culture, the socioeconomic background, and everything of that has an impact on how each person lives their identity disorders. And also, it worries me that here in Mexico, most people don't speak English. So if everything is written in English and researched in English, then how can there be sufficient access to information that they can understand? Also, there is a lot of bias, as also Elephant System was saying. we are represented as unstable, crazy, and in specific, I think in Mexico, we are not understood. And also, the research is just focused, the one that is made here in Mexico is focused on teenage girls and even in children, but they tend to not pay attention at all to adults, which I think would be very important.
So I'm from the Netherlands, so we speak Dutch here. And what we see is that the Dutch therapists do not understand the ISSTD guidelines that are only seem translated to French, which is interesting for Canada, of course. As we know, back in the day, Colin Ross from Canada was on the board of directors for the ISSTD. And so I think that's why it's translated to French, for which I'm grateful. But I think once they revise the ISSTD guidelines and update them, that they really should include more languages that they translate this paper to. And it's 100 pages, which is just too much for people to read if it's not their first language. Like, that's the feedback we get here in the Netherlands. And then the other thing that is that the theory of structural dissociation that you might have heard about before in this conference is developed right here in the Netherlands with our tax money. And the Dutch government has a very funny line in the law. It's an English line saying that the Dutch people, because we have national health care, have the right to evidence-based treatment. That's the exact words, evidence-based treatment. So they use the English word in the Dutch law. And so they provided the theory of structural dissociation funding, or most of it, part of it. And then now we can't get therapy in it. And people say we can't understand the ISSTD guidelines. And here, if you say that you do not have the need to do final fusion alter merging as a therapy outcome goal, you are labeled therapy resistant, which is really a big problem. And so I certainly hope that studies and papers and the guidelines get translated to other languages, just like the DSM is translated in every language, right? So I think we have the right as well that is available in other parts of the country. Sorry, other parts of the world. And indeed, it is still being seen as a North America only thing, which is just completely invalid and not based on actual research. And then the last thing I want to say, here in the Netherlands, and I think in more parts of Europe, the studies done, or the studies that are valid or are labeled valid by the psychology community, are those that are based on trauma that is proven. So things like World War II. And although I see the validity in that, we are not World War survivors, right? Our generation. So it's a completely different outlook on life or whatever that we have, and a completely different background. And so I think that also really needs to get updated, that we use our generation for research if we need research in the first place. Thank you.
Oof. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. That's stuff tough to hear. I'm so sorry. So in your opinion, what is your nation doing right when it comes to mental health? Let's start with Dr. Session.
Funny enough, we were hoping we would not go first, but that's okay on this one. I think it's tough because we have a little less contact with Puerto Rico now than we used to, because last few years we've been focusing on our practice here in the States. So I'm thinking about what has been done in psychology in general and what's been done well. I would say that kind of what some people have mentioned, where here it's only like evidence science-based, right? We don't do that in Puerto Rico. Like, we do have that, but there's also more flexibility in what works well for this person, or what works well like culturally. It depends on what therapist you're talking to. I've seen some that really try to fit American standards, which, I mean, I don't even know what those are and they don't really work. But other people are more like, no, like let's do something more that fits with our own folk healing system. And I really appreciated that when I was there. Besides that, I will say that being plural isn't seen as something completely impossible in our country, which I always thought was interesting. So coming to the US, it was strange that here, everyone, like a lot of psychologists think it's not real or made up or something like that. And there, even the general like population understands it's something that could happen. Now, I'm not saying there's not stigma. There's actually a lot of stigma against people who are plural. So it's complicated. It's more like, oh, we definitely believe that's true and we are afraid of it. So it's not great. But I will say that because there is that mentality, more therapists are open to accepting that someone could be plural than here in the States. So I think that if Puerto Rico continues to find stuff that's more culturally appropriate, it will go well. What worries us is this kind of like trend of trying to be more of a part of the US, which is very complicated, so we won't go into it. But unfortunately, it comes out in these ways of let's go ahead and do what they're doing in the US and see if it works here, which it doesn't really make much sense. Or let's only publish papers in English, which doesn't make sense either because the general population speaks Spanish. And so it's kind of complicated, but we've seen at least some ways in where it can be helpful in getting validity of existence. But then again, like we said, there's still a lot of stigma that needs to be worked on.
So here in the Netherlands, I think for most other mental health disorders, we are doing a really good job. Like we have great inpatient and also non-inpatient, but day-to-day programs for people with eating disorders, for example. We have great help for especially children, but also adults with autism. The waiting lists are horrible, but besides that, the therapy is there, right? And with the ID, we see that the therapy is not there. The waiting lists are there, but by the time the waiting list has passed, the organization does no longer exist or does no longer treat the ID. And so it's really a big problem currently in my country. There was a bit of an uplift around 2012, 13, 14. And then after that, it just dropped down again. And so I feel right now in the Netherlands, most people are burned out, not really up for it anymore, like the therapists, to start over again and to try to fix the situation. And I personally truly blame the ISSGD guidelines on this, because I think what these therapists want is an easy, clean answer on how do we treat this and what is the outcome of therapy, right? What should the goal be? I think it should be on the individual person living with plural beings, right? But for them, they just say, we don't know. And so we see these fights between organizations here in the Netherlands, and they can't agree because the guidelines are unclear, to them at least, in their non-native language. And so their organization breaks up and the clients are, the ones suffering from it. So I can't really say anything currently that the Netherlands is doing great on the ID treatment. Besides, I guess that they did a good conference again last week by the creators of the theory of structural dissociation. So it was Onno van der Hart, Suzette de Boon, and Katie Steele from the USA that did this conference, and there were about 500 people there, but they are all in private practice, and we get national healthcare, so everything is covered therapy-wise besides those in private practice. And so we all live on disability with the ID, because just like the elephant journal system explained in Australia, here as well, the government just instantly labels you as unfit to work. They say they can't be responsible if a minor comes out in the workplace, and so you are going on disability right away. And so you cannot afford that type of healthcare that they provide, that those 500 people were there provide. And so, it's really an issue right now in the Netherlands. And I hope something will change for the better. Thank you.
Hey, so in Australia, the federal government allocates the funding for all the states, and then the states then get to choose what they spend their money on hospitals, education, all that sort of thing. So at the moment, nationally, the government isn't doing a great job for mental illness. In Victoria, though, they have recognised that there's a major issue, and it's actually become a Royal Commission. So that's just started in the last 2 months. Already out of that, they've promised a massive funding going into the system. So hopefully that would bridge the gap that we have between the severe lack of education we've got going on, and hopefully we can get some specialist services. But the other thing is, the issue I take with that is that the federal government also then, I think it was last year, funded a national chaplaincy program so that there were more chaplains in schools throughout Australia, when Australia is, I just looked it up actually, there's only 52.1% Christian. So there was like, excuse me, why are we having chaplains? Why are we getting like in public schools, like not just religious schools? So the federal government needs to take more ownership. They need to be saying to the states, you need to be prioritising mental health because it's becoming the second biggest killer. Suicide's higher than it's ever been, and it's only rising. It's in the news every week that more suicides. And yet they're still not addressing it. But hopefully Victoria maybe gets something. At the moment, we've only got, if you look at the dissociative spectrum, we only treat up to about a PTSD or a BPD, and anything other than that, whoa, you are too complicated. So yeah, thanks.
So currently in Canada, the state of mental health related things is, sorry, there's a car going by. It's really loud. I hope it's not. Anyway, so the current state of mental health in Canada is that provinces are allowed to fund their medical services up to however much. And so it's dependent on each province. And right now, where we live in British Columbia, it's very much so that there aren't enough doctors. And so we're having to go to, say, Vancouver or Prince George or some large city far, far away from like our small towns, which there are tons of small towns in British Columbia. And another big issue is that there are not a lot of doctors who do treat and know about DID. For us, that's not really an issue because we're just plural, but for other systems, that might be a serious barrier to achieving mental health and being able to function day to day. So that's pretty much how it is in Canada.
I think that my country is trying to help people understand and accept the existence of mental illnesses, but little by little and very slightly. For example, there are new infographics in the public healthcare system that let you know if you have depression or if someone you know might be depressed. But that's just about it. I mean, it's barely just depression and anxiety. But also, they're doing something well, which is trying to make people understand the prevalence and the consequences of childhood sexual abuse and how to identify the warning signs. Because it was something that people did not talk about at all a decade ago. And also, they have created a scale called the violentometer, that is a combination between violence and thermometer, that helps people understand what can be the warning signs of an abusive relationship, and they can know how dangerous it is for them at the moment. And they tell them how to look for help or how to get out of the situation. And I think this is valuable because you understand that even if something feels minor, it could escalate to more violence or even death. So now there is more consciousness about all these problems. And also it helps you to not be gaslighted, because if you have experienced some situation that you don't feel comfortable with, then just go to the thermometer and say, well, this is an action that is abusive. I cannot deal with this, so I must go. And it helps you feel validated. And so I think it is little by little improving, but mostly on the side of gender violence and sexual abuse. But there's still a very long way to go.
I'm sorry, I have to digest this stuff too. Wow. Thank you very much. The next question I had for the panelists is, what area does your country need the most work in? I'm not sure if you guys, some of you may have already answered that, but let's find out, I guess. Because maybe it's worse than I thought. Maybe there's more. Let's start with Stronghold. Sorry.
I didn't hear the question.
Power to the plurals.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I didn't hear the question, so I'm sorry. Maybe someone else answers first, and then I'll go.
What area does your country need the most work in?
I think the most work we need is that we add dissociation, what happens to a child when they are being abused, when there is trauma, that gets educated. Because right now, Andrea just explained that they are teaching people in their country about sexual abuse in children, like what that looks like, the warning signs. We've been doing that for at least 20 years in my country. But what they have missed out on is dissociation. They do not know how to recognize it, and they do not know what to do about it. They just say, oh, this child is looking out of the window every day. Or, this year they participated in gym class and they loved it, and the next year they don't see how that is a problem. And I'm like, after all this education, you still don't make the connection. And so what they have been done in our country is that they have been teaching teachers, for example, how many children in their classroom are being sexually abused, if you look at the world prevalence. And so I think what they should add on top of that is that they recognize dissociation, and not just in schools and with children, but also, for example, in the ER room, in the hospital. It's a really big problem that they just don't know what to do with you if you run into an ER here and you are plural, you have the ID. They just don't know how to handle you, what they do for you. They just call you a social worker and send you away. And so that's really a shame, and I really hope they can improve that. And also for the police, if they arrest you, they should be aware, trauma-informed, and aware of the ID, especially if you explain to them that you have the ID. They should not dismiss that. Like, that's not okay. If someone says I'm psychotic, they also take it serious. So it should be the same with the ID, and they should not make the assumption that we're just saying it or faking it or lying to get out of the criminal justice system, because that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what we call in the Netherlands confused people on the street. And so those people, if they tell the police, like, I'm confused, I don't know where I live, they don't take you serious. They just think you're drunk or something like that. And that's really offensive. And I really, really hope that changes in my country.
Ditto to that definitely rings true here. There's no education about dissociation, 100%, yeah. The other thing is, major issues that we have is that there's no specialists on DID. There's 3 psychiatrists who see DID patients in Victoria, and they are not taking any more patients. So everybody I know can't get into them. There's a huge wait list. There's it's so frustrating, really. But the other thing is, as I said, DID isn't talked about. It doesn't exist. The only time it does exist is if there's like a blimp in the media, in like a court case or something. They'll pick it up just to stigmatize it and poke fun of it. So it's there's no support for the psychological community. I mean, psychs aren't being trained high enough. Nurses even, and they're still pushing integration as the only cure. So there's no updated training on that either. the worst thing I hear is that I hear peer stories about plurals that are in crisis and they turn up to a hospital and they say, whoa, it's like too much in the waiting room. So they say to the nurse, I'm just going to go wait outside because it's too much for me in here. And they'll go outside and they've had someone come out and yell at them and say that they're being non-compliant with treatment, and then they get sectioned under the Mental Health Act just because they were being viewed as not compliant, when yet they have a complete understanding for autistic and they're turning off the lights in the supermarket. Like, they're not, it's not happening. Like, you're winning with some and then just completely losing it with others. So yeah, the biggest issue is education. It's got to be the education stuff. Yeah. Thanks.
I think a really big problem in Canada is a lot of what the Elephant Journal system said. It's very much so that a lot of psychologists do not take DID seriously. At least over half of them don't. I think it's probably more likely that a small minority of them do take DID more seriously and plurality more seriously, where you just can't get the help in Canada. So most of the issue is also access. You can't really access the services. Like, everything is pretty much covered in Canada. The only thing that's not covered is private therapists. So if there's a DID specialist who is a private therapist, you can't go to them without paying money out of your pocket. So there's a pretty big gap in the way that Canada says it provides mental health treatment and the way it actually does. So you have, all the access, you have all the money already covered, but you can't access the actual services because they're behind wait times. You're behind having to deal with psychiatrists who do not, and psychologists who do not understand DID. So I think that's pretty much the core problem in Canada, is that it's not believed to be a real thing.
Can I add something to that, Safik? What was really interesting was that I just saw a documentary the other day about Margot Ferreira in Canada, and they claimed that they made over 100 million Canadian dollars in the 90s from this DID program that they had back then. And so to hear that right now it's so difficult and there's nothing out there is really, really interesting and sad also. So it was there, I guess, in the 90s, but not anymore.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting, because I never heard of that before. And yeah, wow, that just kind of piques my interest. I kind of want to look into that now. Thanks.
In Mexico, I think that we need to work more in the area of providing quality and affordable mental care healthcare systems, because it seems that you are only real for the government when your illness is so debilitating that you can no longer function at all and you are a constant risk to yourself or others. So then they get you into a psychiatric ward and that's it. But why do we have to get to that point? Why can't we have an access to early diagnosis, assessment tools, and therapy? But they are virtually impossible to pay for most of the population. Even more if you have a mental illness that prevents you from finding a job or getting out of your house or anything, there are basically no options. So the government is not investing in this at all. You cannot get therapy in a hospital that is public. You have to pay out of your pocket for everything. And also the medications, there are some that the government provides for some cases which are already extreme, but most of the time they are not, they do not have enough stock of these medicines, so you have to go and find them and pay for them. And also there is a lot of negligence in the hospitals. I mean, a little while ago, someone died in a psychiatric hospital because they didn't pay attention to him. They were negligent. And also you are labeled as crazy, and basically everything you ask for is dismissed. So there is still a lot of education to implement in the health community and a lot of resources to be invested in this.
Well, I think we said some of the issues before, so I'm just going to elaborate on some of those. So what I was thinking about when everyone else was talking was that although in Puerto Rico, I do feel like a lot of people believe that being plural exists, although they might have different reasons of what they think may have caused it, but at least people believe it's a real thing. However, because the fear is so large towards anyone who's plural, because there is an assumption of violence or that you're crazy or something's wrong, a lot of the psychologists I've met don't want to work with people who are plural because they're scared of them. And so even the case studies we were mentioning before that were somewhat problematic, one of the reasons is because they describe people who are plural in a way that was like frightening or scary and things like that. I'm also a little distracted by that cute cat. But anyway, so I think that's one of the big issues is that even when we were getting training, DID came up more often than it does in the States, which is, I mean, not saying much, but it was always in a frightening way. It was like, oh, imagine if you had a client like this. Imagine if you had a patient like this. Wouldn't that be terrible? And so all of it was pretty bad. Also, there aren't many people. So not only are there not many people who would be brave enough, I know that seems weird, but to take on a plural case, there aren't many people who have any education in it. And I know that when we didn't live in the capital, what we basically kept being told was like, oh, if you want a therapist, it's actually good, go to the capital. Well, we didn't have any transportation, and the capital was 3.5 hours away if we were lucky. On public transport, it could take a day, 7 to 8 hours, maybe longer. And then you have to pay for the therapy session. So we were like, no, we can't do that. I think that's a big problem. And then like what Andrea was saying, there's a lot of problems with CSA and violence towards women or gender minorities in Puerto Rico. There is some movement towards getting more education to the general public. There are a lot of people who are activists trying to get people to understand that this is a problem. And I really appreciate the work that they're doing. I don't know how it's going because it does seem like there's a big pushback of kind of like, oh, this isn't real or this isn't actually a problem. Why are you talking about this? So a lot has to change for it to be better. And I think the last thing we'll say is that on top of all that, the mental health services aren't great. It's hard to get them. You would only be able to get them easily if you had a lot of money, which a lot of people in Puerto Rico don't for various reasons. And then on the opposite end, a lot of therapists are leaving the country. I mean, we're not there anymore either. And one of the reasons is because they can't get paid. Like the amount that therapists get paid is about the same as minimum wage sometimes, which is crazy. And they can't afford to live there. So a lot of people who can leave the country are leaving. And so then you have people who, even if there is a therapist, they can't afford it. And then the therapist can't afford to live there, so they leave. So it's just, there's a lot of issues going on.
Wow. Thank you, everybody. We have a specific question from the chat for Elephant Journal System. And then we're going to go into our next question for the full panel. So we'll start off with Elephant Journal System. So for Elephant Journal System, is it necessary to get a psychiatrist who treats DID, or can it be treated, I think they mean by any psychologist? So whether it needs to be a psychiatrist, a doctor, or if it can be treated by a psychologist. And then the question to go into for the whole panel at that point is about plurals in general. What are major issues for plurals in your area of the world?
Cool. So 5 words is red tape, paperwork, and waiting for referrals. So I will be answering it in my answer because I already had it in there. So there are a lot of avenues you can go down, but in reference to plurality, my experiences of coming out to a psychiatrist has either been that they believe you, but then they have this belief that you can no longer make informed decisions. And then on the other side, they don't believe you and they keep ignoring the elephant in the room. And they put it down and just think that it's a severe mood disorder. So there's the services that we have at the moment. We've got the Centre for Sexual Assault, which is generally a short-term service. And then there's a Victorian specialist service for personality disorders. But if you actually get into it, you figure out that actually they only treat BPD. So psychiatrists, to have a DID psychiatrist, I think it's really important. I mean, I've got an alter that has ADD or ADHD, my psychologist says, but I can't get any treatment on that because the rest of me does not. So no other psychiatrist would take that seriously. As I said, they either put you in one of the two baskets, the crazy basket or the no, it's not actually happening. Psychologists, however, I believe if a psychologist is willing to work with you, has trauma experience, understands dissociation, has that ability to continue learning, that you could go to them. They're fine. They don't need to be DID specific, because also if not many of them actually advertise it as that. They just say that they are trauma therapists. Yeah. Thanks.
Did you want to talk about plurality in general in Australia?
Plurality in Australia, there's no programs for plurality in Australia. There's nothing official. At the moment, there's local groups where a plural person has said, there's nothing out there. I'm going to start a support group. And I don't actually know, I only know of 3 in the whole country. I'm not connected into the network to know how active other plurals are at trying to find support and connect with each other. I mean, I've found a few from the internet and then gone, oh, look, they're from Australia, and then found it from there. But there's no professional help available, really.
I think some of the issues with for being plural in Canada are largely about accessing mental health services when you're plural, because when you have different headmates that are in your collective, some of them have different traits. Some of them are differently autistic than other people, and some of them have different issues revolving around those things, and that can become a really big issue when you're dealing with a psychologist who doesn't believe that you're plural. They just kind of look at you and go, this isn't happening. This is like someone else said, I don't remember who said it, but this isn't happening. And I was just like, I'm still kind of shocked at this point that it's so uncomfortable for us to come out as plural to psychiatrists and psychologists, because we are not sure exactly how they're going to respond to us, and whether that's going to be put on our medical record permanently, or they're going to try and diagnose us with DID, which we don't have DID. We don't have those issues, and we don't want to be labeled that way because that's just not how we experience plurality. We don't have issues with memory loss or issues switching or issues with communication. So I'm finding a lot of barriers here with psychologists, and especially where I live specifically, in a small town, there are only psychiatrists. They only want to push pills. They aren't interested in talk therapy. They're interested in group therapy, but I even applied to one of those and I didn't get any call back. So there's just a huge gap in mental health regarding plurality if you're plural and you need to go to a psych. And even more so, just like talking day to day with coming up to people, it's frustrating because you never know what someone thinks about you. And that's all because, you know, the medical system kind of, it propagates that. It says that you can't be plural, that it's not real, that it's, you know, it's fake, they're faking it. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say.
I think that some of the major issues, besides the access to mental health care that I have mentioned before, is the stigma, as others have said. Because people here are extremely ignorant about mental health in general, and most of their definitions and references of mental illness come from what they have seen in popular culture, like movies, depictions of villains, and everything that tends us to portray us as dangerous people. So if you have any disorder, no matter which one it is, then you're considered as dangerous and maybe things could get ugly. You could lose your employability, you could be ostracized by society, by your family, your friends. Maybe some people could get physically violent with you because here what they don't understand is attacked. And I really wish that there could be a way to help people understand that mental illnesses are not dangerous. Everyone is prone to have at least depression at some point in their lives. So we have to understand each other more and comprehend what everyone is going through sometimes.
Okay, I think, can you all hear me? Okay, it got a little weird for a moment there. So I know that our experience accessing mental health care in Puerto Rico was very difficult. One, because there really isn't a lot of access, even back then, before we had this mass like exodus of people leaving. It was too expensive, and we grew up like very poor, so there was just no access. We went to public clinics where there really weren't any therapists. At best, you might get a psychiatrist, but kind of like what some people were saying, it was very much like pushing like medication, not really therapy. I don't know that they actually understood what was going on with us. And I just remember the worst experience is when we were in our undergrad that we basically got bumped from one therapist to another in the university. I don't even know how many people we saw. And honestly, they were all terrible. So, and it was this weird, like, I don't believe that y'all are plural, or I don't know, or I'm scared of you, or it would be great to have a plural client. So why don't you stay with me so I can say to people that I have a plural client, which is terrible. So that's the experience that we had. And I know other people had similar experiences as well. There was also a fear, kind of like what Andrea was saying, of coming out and being labeled as like crazy or something's wrong or being ostracized from your family. So many people just wouldn't say it. And even the people I know now who are plural, it's very much of a like, if they're accepted by their family, it's ignored. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, well, we know it's a thing that happens, but that's just because something's wrong with them. Or we don't really talk about when somebody switches. We don't talk about when somebody else is around. So it's that very odd, like, yes, we know it's happening, but we're not actually going to acknowledge it. I don't know of any specialty programs that exist now. I know that years ago, there was a psychologist who, the one we mentioned before, who was seeing mostly DID clients, but the last time we checked in on them, they're not anymore. It doesn't seem like it. And I don't know if anybody else who's kind of like picked up seeing those clients. So I don't know where they're going now. I'm not sure what's actually happening, which is too bad. So I hope that that we're able to get more therapists on the island, more education on this to be able to help more people.
Thank you, everybody. The next question for the panel is, how is plurality in general portrayed in the media in your country, in your own country? So we will be
Princess,
starting.
can I first answer your question, the previous question?
Oh, did you not?
No, I didn't.
Oh, I'm so sorry. See, I'm getting ahead of myself. Yes, you can answer the question. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Thank you. So we already talked a little bit about psychology in my country and not being able to provide DID treatment at this time. So we have something called top referent trauma centers in my country. We have about 5 of them, I think, and they do claim to treat DID, but they're very much integration focused as well. Next to that, we have an organization called Kaleidoscope, which started by people with DID and is a in real life support group that have different groups around the country. It's not really my thing, I guess, but it's helpful to a lot of people in my country. And lastly, we have an organization called Empty Memories that worked very hard in the 90s to try to create something here in the Netherlands for this with DID. Obviously, we're a very small country, so that's very different from everyone else here. Everything is close by, but it still feels far away, right? It's our point of reference is so different. So for us, going to therapy 3 hours away is like the other side of the country, which is insane to us. But for you guys, it might be your normal travel time to your therapist, right? And so Empty Memories, they really tried in the 90s to get something off, and they organized some conferences, the very first conference in the Netherlands where RA and SRA was allowed to talk about. So they did groundbreaking work in the 90s, but unfortunately these days, the lady who started it, she retired. And so it's not really there anymore. So right now in the Netherlands, it's actually kind of sad. There are some, yeah, so there is nothing right now. Not really.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Sorry about that. So the next question for the panel is, how is plurality in general portrayed in the media in your own country? And we're starting with Safik Bouquet.
So we think that most of our media is in Canada here. It's about the same as what it's like in America in terms of movies and TV shows. I don't know if you've ever seen a Canadian movie or a TV show, but often they are low budget value and they're kind of ridiculous because they're not they're not as good of a production as American stuff. So it's pretty much one-to-one when it comes to movies and TV shows. But when it comes to, say, stuff like the newspaper and like the news in general, it's very much so like a pity party. It's like, oh, so-and-so is plural, or they have DID, and oh, wow, do they have a hard life? And they, it's absolutely awful for them. And such a pity. I would hate to be that person, of course, because they don't respect the fact that systems are plural. System is a plural thing, etc. So I think that's about it. I think that there's issues there that just, yeah.
In Mexico, plurality in general is portrayed in the media as basically the movie is split and that's it. I think that people here tend to believe that it is plurality just a work of fiction and something to make stories about. But I don't think that they realize that it is an actual disorder and not by any chance what they portray in the media. I mean, everything there is exaggerated. So the depictions are terrible. All the portrayals of depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, everything are simply out of reality. And they contribute to have to build this image of danger, of instability, and everything of that.
So yeah, as other people have been saying, most of it is very violent and not positive at all. So in Puerto Rico, a lot of our media does come from the United States as well. We do have our own programming, but similar to the topic Bouquet said before, it's not very high budget and it's not great. Also very exaggerated and kind of terrible. So what ends up happening is that I would say, especially movies, because even though a lot of people don't understand English, all the movies that come in have subtitles. So it's more common that someone might go to see a movie than a show, because it's hard to get English shows, especially if you don't have Spanish subtitles on them. So stuff like Split is stuff that people look at, unfortunately, or anything like that. It's like, I think it's also complicated because, how can I explain it? So like, people think, I guess sort of like in the US too, that schizophrenia and being plural are the same thing, and bipolar as well. People don't understand that those things are actually all very different. They see that like, oh, somebody is acting different from one moment to another, it can fall into any of these categories. Or if someone is hearing a voice, then it's schizophrenia, or it might be being plural. It's not called that, but so that's another issue too, is that it's not only the bad media for any plural system, it's also the bad media for all of these other diagnoses that are also kind of all clumped in together. And so then what happens is that when somebody comes out saying, oh, I have X, you have all of that stigma fall on you at the same time. So, I mean, there really isn't any positive media at all that I know of here.
So here in the Netherlands, we also obviously watch the American movies. So we have seen those. They've also been on TV, like the older ones, like Sable has been on TV here in the Netherlands. And so in more recent days, besides the American movies that we have seen here in the cinemas, there's one lady in the Netherlands that is being very bold and brave and being on the Dutch TV explaining about the idea and how she lives her life. But she is together with one other lady who did a documentary and not like goes on talk shows or something. Those are the only two women I can think of in my country who have been on TV and said, I have the ID, this is what I live with. And so I hope that there will be a change in that in the Netherlands. I'm working on that hard myself as well in 2019 to make clear that it's not just one or two people in the Netherlands or in the world that live with the ID. It's 229 million DID systems worldwide and 560,000 in the Netherlands. So they will have to take action and also portray that more correctly in the media, because it's not just one or two people.
A mini America. Also, sorry, we're a mini America. Because yes, most of our shows come from America. We get the news from America. We're very strongly influenced by America. I think that dates back to when we first had an alliance from the World Wars. So it's been generational. We have kids that have American accents, basically. And some have Spanish accents because they watch Dora, but nonetheless. For the most part, though, as I said, plurality doesn't exist. It's highly stigmatized. The only time you see it is those snippet articles where they're just poking fun at it. So there's not really, there is no good portrayal of mental illness in any kind of mental illness. I, on a basic level, tried to explain bipolar, and they couldn't even grasp that. So, like, I was not even going to go there with like other things. So it's difficult to be mentally unwell, and for people to just not understand at all. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. So something a little more upbeat, I hope. Do you have any positive examples of plural acceptance in your area or region? And we're going to start that with Andrea.
The positive example that I have experienced here is just, well, it's very personal in a way, because it is just a friend, a coworker actually, who has now become my best friend, and he has always been very understanding about my mental health. He knows that I am not always the same person he talks to, that I have amnesia, and he accepts me and loves me nonetheless. So it's been really difficult to find someone who is this accepting and understanding. So I'm very glad that there are people like him in the country, and that he has given me a safe space to be myself, and I am extremely grateful.
So we've really been trying to think of any positive examples. I'll be honest, I don't know that we have any. I would say the most positive is the fact, like we said before, that it's believed more here, but then we already spoke about like some of the problems that come along with that. I don't know. I guess the best would be that it was a little bit easier to be out in Puerto Rico than it is here in the States, but you still had to deal with the fact that people might be scared of you. So I don't know that that's actually positive. It's more that if somebody wasn't scared of you, they at least believed you. I don't know. Here in the States, I find that to be harder. I don't know. Only other thing I can think of is that at least in Puerto Rico, when we talk to people about being plural, it made more sense because of the cultural background, in that we're more of a community-based culture and not individual. And our system functions very much culturally appropriately. I don't know how else to say that. So that was easier in Puerto Rico. But really, I don't know of any positive plural examples. Sorry, I wish that I did.
So in my personal life, I have to say that my caseworkers have always tried their best to understand me, to learn more about DID, to watch my videos that I've created, or to read articles on my website or from other people, obviously, as well, in hopes of understanding me and other people better. So I want to give them credit for that. Our caseworkers really work their asses off to try to understand us. And they get no education in this either, right? So for them, it's also new. I also want to say that the people who worked on the theory of structural dissociation, Onno van der Hart and Katie Steele and Suzette Boom, they did work really, really hard to try to create a model that could be implemented worldwide. And it was everywhere, it seems, besides here in the Netherlands. And so when I saw them speak last week, I saw that pain in their eyes when they explained how hard they worked and tried to get this off the ground here in the Netherlands, and that it's just not working out for them. There is no backing up from other mental health organizations. And so I want to acknowledge that I've seen that they've worked very hard for this cause, and that I share their pain that it did not work out in the way they had probably envisioned and hoped for.
With DID Awareness Day on the 5th of March, we actually had part of the local DID support group that I go to talk to their local branch, Headspace it was called, and then they posted on their Facebook. They were after ways that they could help celebrate. And so then I emailed them all these resources and the 10 different ways that they could celebrate. And they contacted back and they put things all over their website. And they also contacted the national office. So hopefully by next year, all of Headspace around the country, and that's like over 120, I think, outlets or services, will all be celebrating DID Awareness Day. So that's epic. And a step in the right direction. That's but not much else, sorry. Not much else.
we feel like just saying nope, next question, because, but that's just kind of unfortunate because, it's a panel and we're supposed to be talking about this stuff in detail. So I think we do have at least one example of plural acceptance. And that's a personal example, which is we have a best friend, or not a best friend, but a close friend who we came out to, and they were really great about it. And they asked a whole bunch of different questions and stuff. But recently they've kind of gone silent about it. So I don't really know what's up with that, but it's not like they're ghosting us. So, I mean, I don't really have any examples in the media or in the government or anything that's publicly posted about the idea or plurality, and it's just nothing, unfortunately.
Thank you again. That was a little bit better. Break the tension. So how can your and country or region improve in terms of plural acceptance? This isn't necessarily treatment in the healthcare system, but in terms of cultural plural acceptance and inclusion. We're going to start with Dr. Serenity Sercession.
I think there's a lot of things that can be done. There are a lot of different types of systems. So the first thing that came to mind is kind of what some people have been talking about, which is basically for trauma-based systems, just having more awareness of trauma in general, of CSA, of domestic violence, et cetera. I think having that would be very helpful for that type of system. For plurals in general, what can my country do? I think if people were able to be more open, which is one of the things that we're trying to do basically, but be more open about who they are so others can see them as like real and not the scary thing that they see in movies or on TV, and realize that a lot of their family members actually are plural and they're not crazy and it's okay. Because I think if that were to happen, maybe people would have more acceptance. So I think that might be useful. That's the biggest thing we can think of, is figuring out ways to help people stop being so scared of those who are plural. Because I feel like at least in our country, people believe that it's real. Like I feel like we have at least gone, we at least have that. Some therapists still don't, but overall the population does. So now it's like, okay, how can you see that this isn't something to be worried about or be frightened? And this is a normal way of experiencing yourselves in your life. And I think that worldwide, we just wish that more people would be out. But the problem is there's so much stigma and consequences to that we also understand why a lot of people can't be. So it's just that if we were able to be out and open and do more things like this, I wonder if that would help other people understand us better as a community.
Well, first of all, we're organizing this conference with you all. So I hope that is going to help to, break the stigma and make a change. Also, I'm so sorry for my cat. He wants to cuddle all day. So what needs to be done is, I think we have to let our voices be heard, all of us, not just traumagenic systems. I think we should all speak up, and especially if you want to bring a cultural change, right? Because those who are not a traumagenic system might not want therapy or need therapy, so they might want to be accepted in a different area of life. And I think for that, you have to come out, you have to talk about it, if that's safe for you, of course. And so I think the way we let our voices be heard is by organizing these conferences and March 50 ID Awareness Day, and by talking to people about DID, even if by not coming out, but by talking to people, about mental health in general and DID in general. You don't have to out yourself, right? If someone doesn't know you, someone on the bus is talking to you about the nice weather, you could pump something in about DID or mental health if you wish, if that's the kind of advocacy and advocacy and activism that you want to do. Not saying go tell everyone on the bus you have the idea yourself, but you could talk about the subject if you wanted without outing yourself. And so I think if we really want to make a big difference, the subject of the ID should not be a secret or something, that we are ashamed about. Obviously, we are ashamed about it and everything that comes with our DID, and it's part of our healing journey. But in general, I think if you take it outside of yourself and look at the bigger picture, for anyone else in the world, you would say, oh, DID isn't the worst thing in the world, right? There is hope for you. And so if we can look at that with that self-compassion to ourselves, I think that would be helpful. And also, what I wanted to point out somewhere in this panel, so I'm going to put it in here, is that DID is the only disorder that's been in the DSM for 25 years in the way it has, and is still destigmatized and can be talked about, and there is no treatment for. And I think that's really weird and interesting, in a not good way, that after 25 years, there are still psychologists even saying, I don't believe in DID. And I think that's really weird. And something we talked about in the Orlando conference was that they said we should all come out. Those with the ID should come out as DID. And we were like, well, if your therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists doesn't even believe us and take us serious, then how do you expect us to come out to the rest of the world who are not trauma informed or trained in this? And so I think that's also something that should be done, is that the therapist and psychiatrist gets trained in dissociation and trauma, and that from that, if they are all if they are all like educated, then I think that can also bring a big change, because they should be the foundation of their psychiatry part, at least. If they don't even know, how should we know, right?
Hey, so in terms of plurality acceptance and exclusion, I'll touch on what the others have said, basically about coming out and trying to do that in a safe way. I mean, I'm definitely I like boundaries. So I'm happy to share everything with everybody. And unfortunately for me, I'd university and I had a job, and actually I had two jobs. And I educated my educators at the university about my disorder. And I did 16 months of an 18-month course. Now they're denying giving me a certificate. They do not want to say stamp of approval that I can go and work in the field that I've just studied for. They sent me to a psychiatrist who, once again, believed me, but then said I can't make informed decisions and would be too emotionally unstable to be around other people. So in terms of trying to come out safely, we haven't really figured out a way to do that yet. In fact, we have now lost our uni and we've lost both our jobs because of speaking up and trying to educate people merely on, just the functionings of our life. When I've worked at one of the places for 5 or 6 years and they've not known, and it's only because I've talked about it that they've gone, oh, whoa, we can't have this. This is dangerous. That I'm going, what am I going to do? So, to me, my plan now is actually that I become a psych, so then people can't really disagree with me per se, because I have the background and the medical knowledge to back myself up. As I'm very capable of doing, which they don't think I am. But for other plural people, in order for them to promote inclusivity, I think Jean Reisman said it best in her interview yesterday. She said is to connect with other plurals, that our voice is louder together, and that we just need to keep shouting until they listen. Thanks.
So we think that a lot of the plural movement can be furthered by doing anonymous things as well as doing in-person things where you come out to people. But I know for some systems it's not possible to come out because in some cases it can be very dangerous for us. It could result in the inability to get a job or to be able to work, or you could lose your family or people around you that you care about because suddenly they think you're crazy or dangerous. And the same for employees often think that plural people are, or plural systems are dangerous. And I think that might be one of the first things we should probably focus on. And I'm not quite sure in what way we should go about doing that. Maybe I think the only solution is to for some systems to start coming out to people and to start coming out maybe even more publicly. Like if you're someone in a higher up position, like Princess Proto, and they came out after having done speed running for years in video games, and they were also a streamer, I think. And it kind of generated a huge movement in the community, and a whole bunch of different systems started coming out, especially after they released their what is it? I think it was a paste bin document. So stuff like that, where if we can kind of come out more and more, then it'll start a sort of chain reaction. And the best case scenario is that people or systems will come out in places of and positions of power. I mean, look at Caitlyn Jenner, for example. Awful role model for the trans movement. But wow, did she generate like talk and conversation about being transgender and being a transgender woman. That just completely escalated everything. And it was just absolutely shocking to see that, because it's the people who have privilege who are the ones who are going to make the most waves in society. So about the only thing we can do for our system to do this kind of stuff for generating awareness and to further the movement is to unfortunately stay sort of silent in our personal life, but publish stuff online, do presentations, that sort of thing. If someone finds out, I mean, it's not the end of our life. It's just kind of inconvenient. So for us, coming out wouldn't be terrifically bad. But I think the other half of that question about inclusion and inclusivity within the community, I think the only way that the community is going to get more inclusive is through the education of people that you could be a system and you don't have to have DID. You don't have to be traumagenic. You can be quadgenic, or you can be endogenic. You could even be a tulpamancer and be a system, or you could be a soul bonder, or just whatever other examples of non-traumagenic systems there are, or non-DID systems. They're all included. I mean, that helps everyone. That helps the movement. When we have enough people included, we have more voices. Like I think the Elephant Journal system said, when we have more voices, we have a stronger movement. So I think that's basically it for what I have to say.
I want to add for a second that Princess Proto, their interview about the speedrunning event that they did and how they came out to, I think, 80,000 people at once, is on this channel's event for the conference. So if you're interested in that, you can watch that after this channel.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. We don't have the internet currently for it, but we will definitely watch it when we can.
Okay, and we have, I think we have one more question for the general panel, and then we have a few questions from the audience. Do you and have any words of advice for non-US plural systems? Is going to be the next question. And we're kicking it off with Sarah and Clark.
Yes, absolutely. As a non-native English speaker, I have to say when I just got diagnosed, I Googled things in Dutch that did not work out. Like there was barely any information there. So if English is not your first language, but you do understand and speak it, or you can use Google Translate, I highly suggest that you do a Google search in English if you're looking for information on a specific topic, as you probably will get a lot more results. And in other areas of my life, that made a lot of sense. Like if I'm looking for a chocolate cake recipe, I will search in English. But for the idea I didn't for some reason, maybe I had the stigmatized idea I might have back then that I was whole North America and that I shouldn't dive into that. But I highly recommend that you do if you can. So that's actually my only tip that I have on this subject.
So my advice would be worldwide to put pressure on government bodies. Go to your local members, complain to them, then make them go to state, then make them go to federal. Because the only change is going to happen if we have funding for it, really. Putting pressure on medical bodies to spark interest in research. You know, the more you talk about it, the more you could approach universities and approach students that are already interested in learning more. That's, you know, if you can contact as many people as possible, you know, you can do it from an email. They may not reply, but you've given it a go. Like I think on DID Awareness, I think I sent everybody in Victoria who had an email with lots of information about DID Awareness Day. But I got one response. So, you know, you just got to keep trying, really. And my advice is to stay strong, join together, and find and connect within your local plural community, if not online, because there's some really great resources out there. Yeah. Can make some awesome friends too.
I think that pretty much everything that the Elephant Journal System said was like amazing. It was like perfect. So I only have a couple things to add. Really, I just assume that I've said all of it because I don't want to repeat it all because it's the same thing. So I think that the biggest thing is to judge your area according to how safe you think it is to come out. If you think it's safe and you're in a good position where you don't think you're going to lose your job or your friends or your family or something that you absolutely just cannot lose, that is something integral to existing, to living in our world day to day. If you can do that, then do come out. Please come out, because wow, it makes a difference. It really does. If you can't, don't feel bad about it. That's totally fine. We can't because there's some issues that we have. But like I said before, if we had to come out, it wouldn't be terrifically bad. It would just really suck. So yeah, I think that's basically it. Come out if you can. Don't come out. Whatever you want to do, whatever is safe for you. And if you can communicate online and make connections online and talk to people online, other systems online, go ahead, do that. Make local groups. Local groups are great because they allow person-to-person like talks and discussions about what should be done with the plural movement and how we should move forward. And I think that's pretty useful, and it gives you support. It makes you feel like you're not alone. So I think, yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
My advice for other systems outside of the US would be to rely on the internet, because we may not have the best access to healthcare in our countries, but we have access to virtual support groups and people who understand and are open to share their experience with us and listen to us. We need to be strong together, and we are not alone. Everything is easier when you know that there is someone somewhere in the world who cares about you. Also, I would agree with the idea that if you can and if it's safe, come out at least a little bit, little by little, to your close friends, your family, and educate them a little bit more about what can cause DID, dissociative disorders, depression, everything, so that they can little by little start deleting all the misconceptions that they have due to the mainstream media.
So for advice to other plurals outside the US, I feel like a lot of people mentioned a lot of really good ideas. I mean, I think one of the biggest things is what people have been saying is connecting through the internet, if you have access to the internet. I know not everybody does. But if you do, it is a really great resource and way to connect to other people. I will say, kind of like what was said at the beginning, that if English isn't your first language, using Google Translate or any other way to understand it would be really helpful. I know that for us, becoming fluent in English really helped in a lot of ways, but one of them was being able to connect to other plurals and even like read more books about other plurals, connect people online, etc. I don't know that we could have done that if we didn't know English, but that's not an easy thing. Thankfully, the internet and translation has gotten much better, and Google will try to translate websites for you, which is great. So I think that that's one way. Also, like what the people were saying, trying to have a community locally if possible, but also, you know, recognizing your own life and your own culture and knowing if it's safe for you to be out or not. I mean, that's really important. So I think just making sure that you all are safe, that you're taking care of yourselves, and you're connecting to others in a way that makes sense for you all as a system. That's what's important. And at least now you know that there are other systems that are not from the US, at least a few of us. And there really are a lot more. It's just that it's hard for people to be out or to even connect, but don't feel like you're alone because we are all over the place. So just remember that.
I want to really thank all of our panelists, and this has really blown me away, and so it's really hard as the panel moderator to even know what to say. I'm like, oh my goodness. It really excites me as somebody from probably the most privileged country when it comes to having DID and having access and being white skinned and excuse the dog. And it's an amazing thing to me to understand how horrible it is here and still understand how much privilege that gives me. And I hope that others appreciate that as well. And so we're going to go to final remarks because we're going to run over, and I apologize to the people in the chat. So we're going to final remarks, and we're going to start with the Elephant Journal System.
Hi. So I just wanted to say that I am blown away by the caliber of this conference. I cannot believe the mark that you have set. Like next year, which I don't know what you're gonna do, but like there's gonna have to be like trapeze artist or something, because like this is ridiculous. It's so beneficial, and there's just so much good coming out of it, and it's going to stay on the internet forever. We're forever going to be on the internet. Like it's but I just I'm so thankful, so thankful, and I'm like really humbled that I can be a part of this. So I really want to thank you, and thank everybody for watching, because you're all a part of this community, and it's so good to connect with everybody. Can't wait to see everybody again.
I'm not exactly, well, we're not exactly sure what to say. We are like super happy to be here. We're super happy to be involved in this, and I think it's great just seeing everyone come out and create things that are plural focused and plural inclusive. And you know, it's just, this is kind of groundbreaking because I've never seen this happen before. it's always, you know, on a forum or on Reddit, or it never really escapes that vacuum. But now it's on YouTube forever. Like the Elephant Journal system said, like, we're on YouTube forever. And it's a scary prospect, but we're really excited about this. And we're really excited to be part of this. So I think that's, yeah, and it's great to hear from everyone here about what their experiences are. And that's just, it's so cool because it's like, I'm in the middle of like the country right now, and I'm on 3G internet, and I'm recording. Well, I'm not recording, but I'm part of this, and so it's really connecting. It's really validating, and I think it's great. So I think that's about it for me.
I would like to say thank you to everyone who made this possible, to everyone that is watching, that is interested in learning more about this, in understanding themselves. And it's really an amazing experience to be able to connect with so many systems, people who understand. And well, that's just it. I'm very happy to be participating in this.
Well, I think I just want to say some of the same stuff everyone else is saying. I mean, we're really grateful that this conference exists at all. I did not think that anything like this would happen anytime soon. I mean, to the point that when we first heard about it, it was a bit anxiety provoking, not in a bad way, because we didn't think that anything like this would happen for a long time. So we're very grateful that it exists, because it's just great to see a lot of other plural people being open and online and being able to learn about everybody. So that's just been really, really great. I think this panel especially is really close to our heart just because it feels nice connecting to systems outside of the US, which especially now that we've moved here is very infrequent. So it was nice to just see other people in other parts of the world and kind of what their experience is like, and finding out that actually they're not that different. So for better or worse, but it's nice to connect to others and be like, oh, okay, all these things that we've gone through, other people have as well. Not great, but at least it's good to know that other people are struggling with the same thing. And that's helpful to know, to not feel so alone. So we're just very grateful to be here.
I am also super grateful for this panel and the opportunity that we had to come together from all over the world, literally, to talk about being plural and the ID. I think it's absolutely amazing. I think this conference is a great success. I think many more people will watch in the next few days and months and go back to these, not just this session, but every session, and you know, learn more new things as we have multiple sessions at the same time. I want to thank our audience for paying attention, for joining this panel session. I want to thank technology for working, because this was quite a risk that we took to host this world panel live. So I'm really glad it worked out tech-wise. I want to thank the Chris's for hosting this panel, and all our panel speakers for joining us here. Thank you all so much also for watching, and have a great rest of the conference. Thank you so much for joining us.
Wait, why am I being unmuted?
We're all unmuted. We're
You're
free.
all unmuted. You're free.
I was also like, wait, why?
I want to say goodbye to everybody and thank you guys for joining us. And thank you very much from all over the world. And Elephant Journal System, go back to sleep. What time is it there? What time is it?
6:10.
Oh, it's 6 in the morning. Forget it. All right.
Exactly right. I got my psych in 2 hours. It's fine.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Add me on Facebook. I want to be friends with you all.
Yeah, add us on Twitter. We posted our Twitter thing in the chat.
Awesome.
I'll get onto Twitter.